My name is Marisol Vidal. I am 26 years old, and I used to believe that if you worked hard enough inside a family, the family would eventually see you. I was wrong. The house I grew up in sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of street where everyone kept their lawns edged and their Christmas lights symmetrical and their opinions about other people's children entirely to themselves. My father, Ernesto Vidal, had built a small empire out of a single hardware distribution business he'd started in his late 20s, the kind of business that never made the newspaper but quietly supplied 12 counties worth of contractors, plumbers, and electricians. By the time I was in middle school, Vidal Supply had 17 employees, a warehouse on the east side of town, and a reputation for never being short on an order. My father wore that reputation the way other men wore a tie, like it was the most important thing on him at any given moment. I want you to stop for a moment, if you can, and think about whether you have ever worked inside a family. Really worked, with your time and your knowledge and your actual professional skill, and had that work treated as though it were simply what you owed them for existing. Because what I am about to describe is not one incident. It is a system. And it took me longer than I would like to admit to see the shape of it. My grandfather, Héctor Vidal, had given Ernesto the first warehouse lease. He had also, separately, opened a savings account in my name the year I was born. I did not know the details of that account. I knew it existed the way you know a fact that has no weight to it yet, something an adult mentions once at a birthday dinner, then never again. A card arrived in the mail every few years with Abuelo Héctor's handwriting on the envelope. I kept the cards in the bottom drawer of my desk without opening the accompanying documents. Abuelo died when I was 19 during my second year of college, and by then I had 3 of those envelopes. I put them in a shoebox, and the shoebox went into storage when I moved into the campus apartment I shared with 2 other girls studying accounting. I studied accounting because numbers had always been the one place where nothing was subject to interpretation. A column either balanced or it did not. I was good at it, genuinely, not in the way people say they are good at things to fill space in conversation. I graduated with a 3.91, passed all 4 sections of the CPA exam on the first attempt, and accepted a position at a mid-size regional firm in Columbus 18 months before the events I am about to describe. I was not rich. I was not impressive by the standard my father applied to impressiveness. But I was competent in a way that was documented, tested, and verifiable, and I had learned early that those 3 words were never going to be enough for Ernesto Vidal when they were attached to a daughter instead of a son. My brother, Tomas, was 2 years older than me and had worked at Vidal Supply since dropping out of his business degree in his junior year. My father did not frame this as dropping out. He framed it as Tomas choosing the business. Tomas had a title, operations director, and a salary I was not supposed to know about but did, because I had helped my mother organize the household files one summer and the payroll summary had been in the wrong folder. Tomas made twice what I made at the firm. Tomas had an expense account. Tomas drove a truck the company leased. None of this was secret, exactly. It simply was never discussed in terms that invited a response from me. My mother, Graciela, was not cruel the way my father was cruel. She was the kind of woman who smoothed things. She would say, "Your father just expresses himself strongly," or "You know how he gets when he's stressed about the quarter," and she would set a plate of food in front of me as though the food were a translation of everything she could not say directly. I did not blame her for this for a long time. Later I would understand it differently. My sister, Renata, was 4 years younger than me and still living at home during this period, working part-time at a boutique downtown and taking community college classes with no particular trajectory. My father never expressed disappointment about Renata's trajectory. Renata was not expected to build anything. Renata was not expected to choose correctly. I had understood for a long time that being expected to choose correctly and then failing was, in my father's accounting, worse than never being expected to choose at all. What I was actually doing during those years, while my father evaluated and found me lacking, was this. The first time my father said it directly was at a Sunday dinner in March, 2 years before the Christmas he would put me out of the house. I had been at the firm for about 8 months. I had just finished my first solo audit engagement. A small manufacturing client, nothing dramatic, but it was mine from kickoff to sign-off, and my manager had flagged my work papers as a model for the junior staff. I mentioned this at dinner. Not boastfully, I said it the way you say a thing when you are 24 and still believe your family wants to know what is happening in your life. I said my manager had used my work papers as an example, and that I thought I might be on track for a senior associate promotion ahead of schedule. My father cut his pork chop and did not look up. Work papers, he said. Yes, I said. I know what work papers are, Marisol. He set his fork down and picked up his knife and continued cutting. I've been running a business since before you were born. I have an accountant. I know what work papers are. I waited. My mother passed the bread. My point, he said, still looking at his plate, is that you're 24 years old and you're proud of paperwork. Tomas closed a distribution contract with 4 new contractors this week. Do you know what that's worth to this business over 5 years? I did not answer. I folded my napkin into a smaller square and said nothing. Tomas glanced at me with the particular expression he had perfected over the years. Not quite a smirk, not quite sympathy, something that lived exactly between the two so he could claim either if pressed. I'm just saying, my father said, there's a difference between working for somebody else and building something. You could work here. You have a degree. But you always wanted to go your own way, so. He picked up his fork again. Conversation over. I had not always wanted to go my own way. I had applied to work at Vidal Supply after graduation, and my father had told me, in almost those exact words, that he didn't want family on the payroll because it complicated things. 6 months later, Tomas was operations director. I had heard this so many times, in so many versions, that I had stopped tracking whether he remembered the contradiction. I was not sure he experienced it as a contradiction. That night, I drove back to my apartment and sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes before going inside. I was not crying. My chest felt dense, like something had settled into it and was arranging itself for a long stay. I had not yet learned to name that feeling, but I would. The pattern was this. Whatever I accomplished existed in a register my father could not read. It was in a language he had decided in advance was not a real language. Work papers. Audit engagements. CPA licensure. These were real things, legally, professionally, financially real things, but inside the system of value my father had constructed, they were at best neutral and at worst evidence that I had chosen incorrectly. The correct choice would have been to be Tomas. Since I could not be Tomas, the correct choice would have been to make myself useful to Tomas. Since I had not done that either, I occupied a category that had no name in my father's vocabulary except, occasionally, disappointment. In the spring of my first year at the firm, my mother called me on a Thursday evening in a voice I had not heard before, a voice that was trying to be calm and not succeeding. The business had a tax issue. Not a catastrophic one, but a filing error from 3 years prior had surfaced during a routine review, and the accountant Vidal Supply used, a man named Gerald who had been doing their books since the 90s and who, I had suspected for some time, had not updated his methods since approximately then. Had told my father the penalties and interest exposure was significant. My mother did not want to tell my father she had called me. She asked if I could look at it quietly. I looked at it. I spent 11 evenings over 3 weeks reviewing Gerald's work papers, which were, in fact, a model of nothing, and identified that the original filing error was correctable under a specific amended return procedure that Gerald had not mentioned, possibly because he did not know it existed, and that the penalty exposure could be reduced by approximately 60% through that procedure combined with a first-time abatement request the business clearly qualified for. I prepared the amended return. I prepared the abatement request. I did not charge for this. I sent it to my mother, who gave it to Gerald, who filed it under his name. The issue resolved. My father never knew I was involved. My mother thanked me by dropping off a container of tamales. The following winter, Tomas called me directly, which was unusual enough that I answered on the first ring, to ask if I could help him understand a vendor contract. He was negotiating with a new supplier and the payment terms had something in them he couldn't parse. I read the contract. I explained the net 90 clause and the audit rights provision and why the indemnification language was broader than standard and which 3 things he should push back on before signing. He said, "Yeah, okay, that makes sense," and hung up. He did not say thank you. At the next family dinner, my father mentioned that Tomas had negotiated an excellent new vendor agreement. That same year, I was 25 now. My father's business partner, a man named Dario who held a 20% stake in Vidal Supply, threatened to exercise a buyout clause after a disagreement about expanding into a second warehouse location. My father wanted to expand. Dario did not. The clause in their partnership agreement was written in language that was genuinely ambiguous about the triggering conditions, and my father's attorney, who was a general practice lawyer and not a business specialist, had told him the clause was probably enforceable and the buyout price it specified was probably binding. Probably. My father was furious, not at the situation but at the uncertainty, because Ernesto Vidal did not operate well in conditions of uncertainty. My mother called me again. I read the partnership agreement. I read it twice. I pulled the relevant case law for Ohio business disputes. I had access to legal research databases through the firm for exactly this kind of ancillary work, and I wrote a 12-page memo outlining why the triggering condition in the clause had not been met, why Dario's proposed exercise was premature under the agreement's own language, and what 3 procedural steps my father's attorney should take immediately to put Dario on notice. I sent the memo to my mother. My mother gave it to my father's attorney. The attorney used it. I know because the language in the letter he sent Dario the following week was lifted almost verbatim from my analysis in 2 places. Dario backed down. The expansion proceeded. My father announced at Easter dinner that his attorney had done excellent work. I sat at that table and ate my food and listened and said nothing. I had kept the firm's billing hours on my own time for all of this. None of it touched my employer. None of it was something I could list anywhere. What I was doing, in the language my father could not read, was protecting a business I had no stake in, using skills he had decided were not real skills, on behalf of a family that would not have known to be grateful even if someone had told them what to do with the information. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from this. It is not the exhaustion of working too much. It is the exhaustion of working without being seen, which is a different thing entirely because it compounds. Each instance of not being seen does not cancel the previous one. They accumulate. By the time I was 26, I had helped resolve a significant tax penalty, guided a vendor negotiation, and prevented a partnership dissolution. None of it on paper, none of it acknowledged, all of it in the service of a business whose owner had told me I had chosen incorrectly and should have been more like my brother. The Christmas I am talking about was a Saturday. I had driven from my apartment to my parents' house on the 23rd, a Friday evening, because my mother had asked me to come early to help with the cooking. I did help. I spent most of Friday evening and all of Saturday morning in the kitchen with her, making the tamales and the pozole and the flan that my father expected to be on the table without ever appearing to notice the labor required to put it there. Renata drifted in and out of the kitchen, tasting things and offering opinions about seasoning, and disappeared again. Tomas arrived late on Saturday morning with his girlfriend and immediately went to find my father in the study, where the 2 of them spent the next 2 hours talking about the business. The dinner itself was fine until it wasn't. Started with something small, the way these things always do. My father made a comment during the meal, about the expansion, about the second warehouse, about how the business was entering a new phase that required serious people making serious decisions. He was looking at Tomas when he said it, but he was talking, I understood, for the benefit of the table. Then he turned to me. You still at that same firm? He asked. Yes, I said. Same position? Senior associate now, I said. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when something confirmed a belief he already held. Still doing other people's taxes. Financial auditing, primarily, I said. I kept my voice level. Right. He picked up his wine glass. I just think, at your age, you should be building something. Not just maintaining someone else's records. He said maintaining the way some people say babysitting. Tomas at your age had already been with the business 2 years. He was learning something real. I capped my pen. There was no pen, but my hand moved toward the water glass and I set it down carefully instead, and I did not answer immediately. I think what I do is real, I said. I didn't say it wasn't real, my father said, which was exactly what he had said. Tomas's girlfriend looked at her plate. Renata reached for the bread. My mother stood up to get something from the kitchen that did not need to be gotten. "You've always been like this," my father said, and his voice had shifted into the register I knew, not louder but settled, the register he used when he was delivering a conclusion he had reached long ago and was only now announcing. "Independent. Which is fine. But independent means you handle your own things. You make your own way. You can't expect to always have this," he gestured at the table, at the house, at everything, "as a backup." I looked at him. "I'm not using this as a backup," I said. "I came home for Christmas." "I'm just saying," he said, "that at some point a person has to decide what they are. And I think you've decided. And that's fine. That's your choice." I did not understand in that moment what he was deciding on my behalf. I would understand it 36 hours later. The next morning, Christmas morning, I came downstairs to find my parents in the kitchen with a conversation already in progress that stopped when I appeared. My father turned. He was holding his coffee cup with both hands. He looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they have decided to solve. "We've been talking," he said. "Your mother and I. And we think, given everything, it would be better if you found your own place. Permanently." I stood in the doorway in my socks. "You mean?" "We need the room," he said. "Tomas and Elena are talking about moving in for a while they find a place. It makes more sense. You're independent. You said so yourself." I had not said so myself. He had said so 4 times at dinner the night before. "Today," I said. He looked at his coffee. "It would be better not to drag it out." My mother was standing at the counter with her back to both of us. I looked at her back for a long moment. She did not turn around. "I need to get some things from my room," I said. "Just the basics," my father said. "The furniture stays, it's the house's furniture. Take what you need for a few days and we can arrange the rest later." "Later." He said later the way people say words they have no intention of honoring. I went upstairs. I moved in a way that felt mechanical and accurate, like I was completing a procedure I had trained for without knowing it. I took my work bag, my laptop, my clothes, my toiletries, my phone charger. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and I took the shoebox. At the front door, my father did not hug me. He said, "You'll be fine. You're capable." He said it like a receipt, proof that the transaction had been completed in good faith. It was 41 degrees outside and I had no coat because my winter coat was in the hall closet and I had not thought to get it and I was not going back. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway on Christmas morning with a shoebox on the passenger seat and my hands on the steering wheel, and I did not move for 4 minutes. My throat was tight, then tighter, and I breathed until it loosened enough to drive. I had one thought, underneath the cold and the shock and the particular humiliation of being told you are capable by the person who just put you out. I had nowhere to go for 3 days because every professional contact I had was unreachable until after the holiday. Except a bank. The branch downtown that handled legacy accounts had a manager's line on its website, with a note that said accounts opened before 1998 had a dedicated service contact available by appointment on alternating Saturdays. I had seen this once, years ago, and forgotten it. I found it again on my phone in the parking lot of a gas station where I stopped to buy a bottle of water and a granola bar because I had not eaten breakfast. The shoebox was on the passenger seat. 3 envelopes in my grandfather's handwriting. I did not know what was in them. I had never opened them. I called the number. The branch downtown was not closed on the Saturday after Christmas. I know that sounds like a small thing. It did not feel small. I had called the number from the gas station parking lot expecting a recording, and instead a man answered, unhurried, professional, and told me that yes, legacy account holders could schedule a same-day appointment if the branch had availability, and that there was a 10:15 slot open if I could be there by 10. It was 9:42. The branch was 6 minutes away. I was there at 9:51. The manager's name was Mr. Okafor. He was a trim man in his early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular manner of someone who had delivered both very good and very bad news to people across a desk and had learned to keep his face neutral until he knew which kind this was going to be. He brought me into a small office off the main floor, offered me water, and I set the shoebox on the chair beside me and told him I had inherited an account from my grandfather, Ernesto Vidal, and that I had never formally accessed it. He asked for 2 forms of identification, the account number if I had it, and the name of the original account holder. I had the envelopes. I had my license and my work ID. The account number was printed on a statement inside the first envelope. I opened it for the first time sitting in that chair, my fingers moving carefully along the seal. Mr. Okafor typed. He looked at his screen. He looked at it for a moment longer than the situation seemed to require. Then he took his reading glasses off his forehead and put them on. Ms. Vidal, he said, I'm going to pull up the full account history, because there are some components here I want to make sure I explain correctly. He said it in an even voice, and then he turned the monitor slightly toward me and began. My grandfather had opened the account when I was born. It had started as a standard custodial savings account. Modest, the kind of account a grandfather opens for a grandchild with the intention of covering a first car or a college semester. But Ernesto Vidal had continued to make contributions. Quarterly, then monthly after he retired. And he had, at some point in my early childhood, restructured the account into a trust vehicle, a formal irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary administered through the bank. This was in the second envelope. I had not opened the second envelope. Mr. Okafor had a copy of the trust document on file. The contributions had compounded. There had been investment allocations I was not aware of. Conservative ones, index-based, the kind of allocations a careful man makes when he has more confidence in time than in speculation. Ernesto Vidal had died 7 years ago. The trust had continued to compound under the bank's administration since then, per the trust document's instructions, which specified that the principal and all accumulated returns were to remain in the trust until I either reached 30 years of age or formally claimed the account before that age, whichever came first. I was 26. I could claim it now. Mr. Okafor told me the current balance. He said the number in the same even voice he had used for everything else. The number was $2.4 million. I looked at the screen. I looked at the number. I squared the statement on the desk in front of me, and I did not say anything for a moment. There are some administrative steps, Mr. Okafor said, giving me the moment without drawing attention to it. You'll want to engage an independent financial advisor before making any distribution decisions. The trust documents also name a secondary clause that I'll want to walk you through. It specifies conditions under which the bank was instructed to flag if the account remained unclaimed past your 28th birthday, at which point automatic distribution would have initiated. But since you're here, that clock stops. My grandfather set all of this up, I said. It was not a question. The trust was drafted in this branch, Mr. Okafor said. He came in annually to review the statements until the last 2 years of his life when he handled it by phone. He was quite specific about the structure. He paused. He also left a letter. Third envelope. The bank was instructed to provide it upon your first visit. I had 3 envelopes. I had opened 2. I opened the third one at the desk in Mr. Okafor's office, which was not where I had expected to open a letter from my grandfather, but nothing about that day was going where I had expected. Abuelo Hector's handwriting was deliberate and slightly formal, the handwriting of a man who had learned penmanship as something that mattered. He wrote that he had watched me carefully from the time I was small. That he had noticed things. That he believed I would do something with my life that required a foundation, not a rescue, and that there was a difference between the two. He wrote that he did not know what would happen inside the family after he was gone, but that he wanted me to have something that was entirely mine. Not contingent, not conditional, not subject to anyone else's evaluation of my worth. He wrote, near the end, whatever they tell you you cannot do, you were doing it before they finished the sentence. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. My throat tightened and I held very still until it passed. Mr. Okafor gave me the name of 3 independent advisors the bank commonly worked with and told me there was no urgency. The trust was not going anywhere. I thanked him. I took the folder of documents he had prepared. I drove to a diner 2 blocks from the branch and ordered coffee and eggs and sat in a booth by the window for an hour and a half and read every page of the trust document twice. By the time I left the diner, it was early afternoon. Christmas Day. I had been put out of my family's house 7 hours ago. I knew, sitting in that booth, that I was not going to let this be quiet. I did not go back that day or the next. I needed 2 things first: a financial advisor and a clear head, and on Christmas Day I could access exactly one of them. I spent the next 48 hours in a hotel downtown. I put it on my credit card and did not think about the cost, reviewing the trust documents, making notes, and scheduling a call with one of the advisors Mr. Okafor had recommended for the first business day after the holiday. The advisor, a woman named Patricia, confirmed everything Mr. Okafor had told me and added 2 details. The trust was structured to be entirely shielded from any family claim, and the investment allocation over 26 years, combined with the original contributions, meant the actual growth had been more than either of us might have guessed from the headline number alone. She recommended I not make any distributions for at least 60 days while she completed a full review. I agreed. Then I made one call my father would not have expected. I called Tomas. Not to tell him about the trust. To tell him I needed the family together. I told him I had found something in Abuelo Hector's things that everyone needed to hear, and that I would come to the house on Saturday, 5 days after Christmas, if my father was willing to have me there. I said it exactly that way, if he is willing. I knew Tomas would repeat it to my father. I knew my father would interpret if he is willing as evidence that I was coming to apologize or concede something, because that was the only frame he had for a daughter asking for an audience. My father said yes. Of course he said yes. I arrived at the house on Saturday morning with my work bag and the folder of trust documents and the 3 envelopes and nothing else. My mother opened the door. She looked at my face and she started to say something and then did not. My father was in the living room. Tomas was on the couch. Renata was on the stairs, halfway down, which was how Renata always positioned herself when she sensed something was about to happen. Close enough to watch, distant enough to retreat. My father looked at me with the expression I had seen my whole life, patient, already decided. Marisol, he said. Sit down. I'll stand, I said. This won't take long. He shifted in his chair. He did not like that. You said you found something of your grandfather's. I did, I said. I reached into my work bag and produced the folder. I set it on the coffee table in front of him. I did not hand it to him, I set it down and let him look at it. What is this? He said. Abuelo Hector opened a trust account for me when I was born, I said. I accessed it on Christmas morning after I left here. I'd like you to look at the current balance on the 2nd page. He opened the folder. He found the 2nd page. He looked at it. The room was very quiet. This is, he started. $2.4 million, I said. Yes. Tomas leaned forward. My mother made a sound I could not fully interpret, something between a breath and a word that didn't make it all the way out. Why didn't you tell us? My father said, and his voice had a quality in it I had never heard before. Not anger yet, something underneath anger, something closer to recalibration. I didn't know, I said. Until Saturday morning. When I was sitting in my car in your driveway with a shoebox on the passenger seat. He looked at me. I want to say some things to you, I said. And I'd like you to let me finish before you respond. He nodded. He was still looking at the 2nd page. You told me at dinner on Christmas Eve, I said, that I was still doing other people's taxes, that I was maintaining someone else's records, that there was a difference between working for someone and building something real. I kept my voice even. I watched his face. In the spring of my first year at the firm, I was 23. Mom called me because Vidal Supply had a tax filing error. Gerald had missed an amended return procedure that reduced your penalty exposure by 60%. I found it. I prepared the amended return and the abatement request. Gerald filed it under his name. You never knew I was involved. You saved a significant penalty on that resolution, and you thanked Gerald at Easter. My father's jaw moved, but he did not speak. You told Tomas at dinner last year, I said, that he'd negotiated an excellent new vendor agreement. Tomas called me before he signed that contract because he couldn't parse the payment terms. I read the contract. I told him which 3 clauses to push back on. He went back to the vendor with those specific points. I was doing other people's paperwork. Renata had come the rest of the way down the stairs. You told me at my 24th birthday dinner that I had always chosen to go my own way, I said. That was 8 months after you told me you didn't want family on the payroll because it complicated things. 6 months after that, Tomas was operations director. I did not bring this up then. Instead, when Dario threatened to exercise the buyout clause in the partnership agreement, and your attorney said it was probably enforceable, Mom called me. I pulled the case law. I wrote a 12-page analysis of why the triggering condition hadn't been met. Your attorney used that analysis in the letter he sent Dario. Dario backed down. The expansion happened. You told us at Easter that your attorney had done excellent work. The room was still. What I was doing while you were telling me I hadn't built anything, I said, was building the conditions under which your business survived 3 separate crises over 4 years. Without a title. Without a salary. Without being in the room when the credit was given. I paused. And on Christmas morning you told me I was capable. Right before you put me out of the house so Tomas could have my room. My father said, Marisol. I'm not asking for an apology, I said. I have the trust. I have Patricia. I have everything I need. I picked up the folder from the coffee table. I came here because you deserve to know what the record actually shows. What I was actually doing. Not so you'd feel badly about it. So you'd know. I put the folder back in my bag. The room situation, I said, is fine. I've found a place. I had not found a place yet. But I would, and he did not need to know the sequence. I walked to the front door. I put on my coat. I did not slam the door. I pulled it closed behind me with both hands until I heard the latch click, and I stood on the front step for exactly 1 breath, and then I walked to my car. My mother called that evening. She did not speak for a moment when I answered, and then she said, I didn't know. About the tax thing. Or the contract. I knew about the partnership memo. I gave it to your father's attorney myself. But I didn't tell him. I know, I said. I should have, she said. I did not tell her it would have made a difference. I was not sure it would have. Instead I said, Abuelo Hector knew. She was quiet for a moment. He always said you were like him. I thought about the letter. About the handwriting. About whatever they tell you you cannot do, you were doing it before they finished the sentence. I know, I said again. Tomas did not call. Renata texted 3 days later, that was a lot. I replied, yes. That was the whole conversation. My father did not call for 11 days. When he did not apologize. He asked if I would be willing to consult on a contract issue the business was having with a new distribution partner. He said it carefully, in a voice I had not heard from him before, a voice that was aware for the first time that he was asking instead of assuming. I told him I would think about it. I said it kindly because I am not interested in cruelty in either direction, and because I had already decided that what I did next with my competence was entirely my own choice and not a response to anything he had decided about me. That distinction matters. I want to be clear about it. I have thought a lot, in the months since, about what my grandfather understood that my father did not. Hector Vidal was not a complicated man in most ways. He liked coffee with too much sugar, and he kept every receipt for every purchase he ever made in a wooden box in his kitchen, and he called me Mija until the day he died and never once asked me to be anything other than what I already was. What he understood, I think, is that worth does not require an audience. That you can do real work in the quiet, and the quiet does not diminish the work. That the record is the record, whether or not anyone is reading it at the time. There is a version of this story where I spent those 4 years bitter, or where I stopped helping because the help was never acknowledged, or where I let my father's version of me become the version I believed. I did not do any of those things, and I am not sure I deserve much credit for that. I think I was just stubborn in a particular direction. But what I know now is that the account was always there. The letter was always in the 3rd envelope. The record was always real. I was just the last one to read it. Whatever you have built quietly, in the years when no one was keeping count, it counts. The ledger does not care who is watching. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it. It might be the thing they're sitting with right now. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, and events are entirely fictional and not intended to represent real individuals or situations.